My name is Sarah, and for the past decade, I've lived what most people might call an ordinary, even enviable life. I share a comfortable home with my husband John and our young son, Michael. Our house sits in a quiet neighborhood with a small garden in the back, where Michael plays in the afternoons, and where John sometimes escapes to unwind after a long day of work. John and I have been married for 10 years. In the beginning, we were deeply in love, like two people who had found the missing parts of themselves in each other. We laughed easily, we talked about everything, and we dreamed about our future together. Over time, life settled into a routine. Work, chores, raising a child. But we remained happy, or at least, I thought we were. John is a good man. He works hard, often, more than he should. He's responsible and dependable. He takes care of Michael with great patience and never hesitates to help around the house when he's home. He remembers birthdays, brings flowers on anniversaries, and always kisses me goodbye in the mornings. By all appearances, we had built a stable, loving family. But appearances can be deceiving. If someone had asked me just a year ago, I would have said with confidence that my life was secure, predictable, and emotionally steady. There were no signs, at least none that I recognized, that things were shifting beneath the surface. I went to work each day believing everything at home was as it should be. I tucked Michael into bed with the comfort of knowing he had a stable family. And when I looked at John across the dinner table, I still saw the man I married, though perhaps now through the lens of familiarity, not passion. That slow dulling of connection, I think, is something many couples face after years together. We become used to each other, accustomed to the rhythms of daily life. The excitement fades. The late-night talks turn into brief exchanges. The silence becomes routine. Still, I had no real complaints. My life was calm. It was safe. And I never imagined that everything would begin to change with something as simple as hiring a helping hand. About 6 months ago, John and I decided that we could use a bit of extra help around the house. Between our jobs, raising Michael, and trying to maintain some balance, things were starting to slip. The garden was overgrown, laundry piled up faster than we could manage, and our weekends were filled with chores instead of rest. After a few conversations, we agreed to hire someone part-time to help keep things in order. That's how Alex came into our lives. He was recommended by a friend of John's, someone reliable, quiet, and trustworthy. When I first met him, I didn't feel anything unusual. He was polite, calm, and reserved. He spoke softly and smiled easily, but he didn't talk much unless spoken to. His presence was pleasant, but unremarkable. Just another person doing a job. Alex helped with household tasks, cleaning the kitchen, watering the garden, and folding laundry. He also helped keep an eye on Michael when we were both busy. Michael took to him quickly. Kids have a way of sensing kindness, and Alex had that calm, gentle energy that children seem drawn to. Over time, he became part of the daily rhythm in our home. He came in quietly, did his tasks, and often left before dinner. There was never anything odd or inappropriate in his behavior. In fact, he was almost too professional, always maintaining a respectful distance. I appreciated that. It made it easier to trust him in our home and around our child. At first, I barely noticed him. He was just another part of the background, like the sound of the dishwasher or the hum of the air conditioner. But sometimes, when I came home from work and John wasn't there yet, I would find Alex in the kitchen reading a book or helping Michael with a puzzle. He wasn't intrusive, just present, always quietly fitting into the space without causing disruption. I didn't see him as anything more than a helper. In fact, I felt grateful to have someone reliable, someone who made my busy days a little easier. If anything, I felt sorry for him. He told me once, during a short chat, that he had moved to the city alone and didn't have family nearby. He lived in a small apartment and spent most of his time either working or reading. I remember thinking he must be lonely. At the time, I didn't realize that loneliness wasn't just his. It was quietly growing in my own heart too, hidden beneath routine and responsibility. I just hadn't noticed it yet. It happened on a Thursday evening. One of those days when the hours drag, but the responsibilities don't stop piling up. I had stayed late at work, finishing reports and answering emails long after the office had gone quiet. By the time I got home, the sun had set and the house was bathed in soft yellow light. John wasn't home. He had messaged earlier to say he was working late on a client proposal. Michael was already asleep, his favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm. The house was unusually calm, the kind of stillness that only comes when a child is finally asleep and the world pauses for a moment. I found Alex sitting at the kitchen table, reading. There was a cup of tea in front of him, untouched. He looked up when I entered, offered me that usual quiet smile, and nodded politely. I was tired, too tired to go straight to bed. Something about the quietness of the room, or maybe the expression on his face, peaceful but somehow distant, made me sit down across from him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't anything at all. Just two people sharing a quiet space at the end of the day. We started talking. At first, it was simple. I asked about the book he was reading, and he told me it was a novel by a writer from his hometown. He spoke about the city he came from, how different it was from here, how much he missed the mountains and the slow pace of life. He told me he had no family nearby, that he had come to the city looking for work and a chance to build something new. There was no bitterness in his voice, just honesty. As he talked, I listened, really listened, and in a way I hadn't done with anyone in a long time. I shared a bit about my own life, nothing too personal. At first, just the usual things about work, parenting, and how hard it can be to juggle everything. But as the minutes passed, the conversation deepened. We spoke of small regrets, of childhood memories, of dreams we once had and quietly let go of. It surprised me how easy it felt. It had been a long time since I had spoken with someone like that, without filters, without expectations. With John, our conversations had become mostly practical. Who's picking up Michael? Did the bills get paid? What's for dinner? But with Alex, this talk felt effortless, like a forgotten part of myself was slowly waking up. That night, I went to bed with a strange feeling. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was something else. An awareness that something had shifted, however slightly. A seed had been planted, and I didn't yet understand what it would become. I told myself it was nothing, just a conversation, just a quiet evening shared between two people. But I knew better. A few days passed after that evening in the kitchen, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Or at least, it pretended to. John continued to work late, Michael went to school and played with his toys, and I kept busy juggling home and office. But beneath the surface of my everyday tasks, something felt altered. My mind kept circling back to that conversation with Alex. I could still hear the softness in his voice when he spoke about his hometown. Still felt the way the air in the kitchen seemed different when we sat together. Then John had to leave town for a short business trip, 3 days in another city to attend meetings and meet clients. It wasn't the first time he had traveled for work, and normally I didn't mind. I would spend the time catching up on house chores, watching shows John didn't enjoy, and enjoying some quiet moments with Michael. This time, it felt different. I felt exposed. alone in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not because John was gone physically, but because emotionally, the distance between us had already grown without me realizing it. The first night of his trip, after putting Michael to bed, I came into the kitchen to find Alex tidying up. I thanked him for helping with dinner and for being patient with Michael, who had been unusually energetic. He laughed and said he didn't mind. I offered him a cup of tea. He accepted. We sat again, just like before. We talked. We laughed. I felt lighter, like I could breathe in a way I hadn't in months. The way he listened, really listened, made me feel like I mattered. Not just as a wife, a mother, or a person who managed tasks, but as a woman, a person with thoughts, stories, and feelings. And then, in a moment that seemed to escape logic and time, it happened. I leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle, brief, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. It felt like crossing a threshold I hadn't realized was even in front of me until I had already stepped over it. As soon as our lips parted, I pulled back. My heart was pounding. Shame and confusion hit me like cold water. I looked at Alex, expecting what? Anger? Surprise? He just looked at me with a calm expression, as if he had expected nothing and everything all at once. He didn't say a word. "Oh, I'm sorry," I whispered. "That was a mistake." He nodded, but still he didn't speak. Maybe he knew there was nothing to say. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. My mind was a storm. Questions, guilt, and panic. What had I done? How had I let it happen? I thought of John, of how much he trusted me, of Michael, so innocent, sleeping down the hall. I told myself it would never happen again, that I would forget this, that it was just a slip, a single lapse in judgment, a mistake, one I swore would never repeat. But deep down, I feared the truth. Despite all the promises I made to myself, despite the guilt that settled into my chest like a stone, it happened again. It didn't take long. Just a few days after that first kiss, the one I swore would be the last, I found myself slipping further down a path I couldn't seem to avoid. John was still away, his flight delayed by weather or meetings or both. I was alone again, in the house with Michael and Alec. That second night, after Michael had gone to bed and the dishes had been cleaned, Alex lingered longer than usual. I could have asked him to leave. I should have. But I didn't. Instead, I made tea again. Instead, I sat across from him again. And instead of talking about books or work or safe things, we sat in a silence that said more than words ever could. There was something between us now, unspoken, magnetic, impossible to ignore. And when our eyes met, I didn't look away. This time, when I kissed him, I didn't stop. It wasn't a quick, confused moment like before. It was longer, deeper, intentional. My hands trembled, my heart raced, but I didn't pull away. For a few minutes, I forgot everything. I forgot John. I forgot the life we had built. I forgot the vows I had once spoken with sincerity. All that existed was that moment, that fire that had been quietly smoldering inside me and now had space to burn. When it was over, I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I just sat there, breathing heavily, feeling the enormity of what I had done settle into my bones. The next day, everything looked normal. I went through the motions, making breakfast, checking Michael's school bag, answering emails. But inside, something had shifted again, and this time, I wasn't sure it could be undone. Alex and I didn't speak about it. We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer awkward. It was filled with understanding, with shared guilt. We avoided each other when John was around, kept everything looking neat and proper, but when we were alone, there was a tension in the air, thick and unspoken. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I kissed John, I thought of Alex. Every time I tucked Michael into bed, a part of me ached with shame. I loved my family. I did. But I had opened a door I couldn't close. I was split down the middle, torn between the life I had and the feelings I couldn't deny. I wanted to stop, I truly did, but I didn't know how. It was like something had awakened in me, something that had been buried under years of quiet disappointment and routine. And now that it had risen, it refused to be ignored. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while John slept beside me, peaceful and unaware. My chest tightened with dread. How could I keep living like this? With this secret growing larger every day, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. The truth was simple. I had crossed the line, and I had no idea how to go back. On the outside, life went on exactly as it had before. John returned from his trip, tired but cheerful, with a small gift for Michael and a hug for me. We ate dinner as a family, watched television in the evenings, and spent weekends going to the park or doing groceries like any other couple. But inside me, something had changed in a way I couldn't hide from myself. I had a secret now, a heavy one. Every smile I gave, every conversation I had, every kiss I returned from John. It all carried the weight of what I wasn't saying. The guilt didn't scream. It whispered constantly, pressing into every quiet moment, every breath I took. When I looked at John, I saw more than the man I had married. I saw the person I had betrayed. He had no idea, of course. He treated me with the same warmth and trust he always had, and somehow that made it worse. Because he believed in me, and I had broken that belief. Alex still came to the house as usual. He did his work, played with Michael, and always greeted John with polite respect. If someone had walked into our home, they would have seen a perfectly normal scene. Nothing suspicious, nothing wrong. But when John wasn't around, it was different. We didn't touch. We didn't speak of what had happened, but our eyes met in quiet glances that carried too much meaning. The air felt charged when we passed each other in the hallway. Even the smallest interaction was laced with tension, with memory. I started to lose sleep. At night, I would lie in bed next to John, listening to his steady breathing. I would stare at the ceiling, unable to quiet the thoughts that looped endlessly in my head. What if he found out? What would he say? What would it do to our family? But I didn't just fear the consequences. I feared what the truth said about me. I wasn't the kind of person who cheated. Or at least, I had never imagined I could be. I had judged people who did, assumed they were selfish or cruel. But now, I had done exactly what I once condemned. And no matter how I tried to explain it to myself, no excuse felt good enough. There were moments I wanted to confess, to sit John down and tell him everything. Just lay it all bare and deal with the fallout, whatever it might be. But every time I imagined the look on his face, the hurt, the betrayal, I couldn't go through with it. So I stayed silent. I lived each day pretending everything was fine. I smiled, laughed, and kissed my husband. I read bedtime stories to Michael. I cooked meals. I lived two lives. And every day the secret grew heavier. Weeks passed. The weight of the secret I was keeping had not lessened. It had only grown heavier, sinking deeper into my chest like a stone I couldn't dislodge. I had become a master of appearances, the attentive wife, the doting mother, the composed professional. But behind every smile was a tremor, and behind every moment of calm was a storm waiting to break. Then one evening, I found something that shattered the illusion I thought I controlled. John had left his phone on the kitchen counter. He was upstairs giving Michael a bath, laughing and splashing with him, the sound echoing through the hallway like any other ordinary day. I wasn't looking for anything. At least, that's what I told myself. But when the screen lit up with a message notification, my eyes caught a name I didn't recognize. A woman's name. The message was simple, innocent on the surface. To see you. I miss you. When can I see you again? My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I opened the thread. The conversation stretched back weeks. Short, flirty exchanges, meeting times, compliments. There were no explicit photos or declarations of love, but it was enough. More than enough. John was seeing someone, and he had been for a while. For a long moment, I felt nothing. Not shocking, not anger, just emptiness. A strange kind of numbness that comes when the world you've known tilts suddenly and violently off its axis. Then the emotions hit all at once. Rage, betrayal, confusion. How could he do this to me? To our son? To our life? And then, almost immediately, the sharp edge of hypocrisy cut through my fury. Hadn't I done the same? I had betrayed him too. I had crossed lines. I had kissed someone else more than once. I had let something grow behind his back. I had lied every single day. We were both pretending. Both are keeping secrets. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the screen, at the little digital symbols that represented so much real pain. And in that moment, the truth became terrifyingly clear. We had both failed each other. Later that night, after putting Michael to bed, I sat on the edge of our bed, trying to breathe. John came in, smiling from the bedtime routine, and asked if everything was okay. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger who was hiding as much as I was. A man with his own guilt, his own secret. We were both living lies, and I didn't know how much longer we could keep it up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned beside John, listening to his breathing, wondering how he could seem so calm, so unaware, while I felt like I was unraveling thread by thread. But I knew I couldn't live like this anymore. The secrets, the lies, the quiet performances we put on for each other every day, it was all breaking me. I couldn't keep pretending, not when I knew the truth, not when I had seen the messages, not when I had kissed someone else and kept it hidden like a poisoned memory. So, the next evening, I made a decision. After we put Michael to bed and the house settled into its usual quiet, I asked John to sit with me at the kitchen table. He looked confused, but didn't resist. We sat across from each other, two people who had once stood before friends and family and vowed to be honest, to be faithful, to share everything. And now there we were, two people holding broken promises in our hands like glass, afraid to touch them but unable to look away. My throat was dry. My hands were shaking. I had rehearsed the words in my head 100 times, But now that I had to say them out loud, they felt foreign and frightening. "John," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was trying to read me. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm but wary. I couldn't look him in the eye. I've been seeing someone." The words came out slowly, as if they hurt on their way out. And they did. Every syllable felt like a betrayal given shape. There was silence. A heavy, deafening silence stretched across the room and wrapped around us like a fog. "Who?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. I told him everything. About Alex, about the conversations, the nights he was away, the moments that spiraled into something more. I told him how guilty I felt, how sorry I was, how much I still loved him, despite it all. I cried. I couldn't stop the tears. I felt stripped bare, exposed, vulnerable in a way I had never experienced. John didn't yell. He didn't stand up or slam his hand on the table or accuse me of destroying everything. He just sat there, looking at me with a blank expression. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he said quietly, "I've been seeing someone too." Now it was my turn to go silent. The room tilted. My breath caught. I wasn't expecting that. Not like this. Not so quickly. Not as a mirror to my own confession. He told me it started months ago, that he hadn't meant for it to happen, but it did. He apologized. He looked genuinely ashamed. And just like that, the illusion we had built for years shattered completely. No more secrets, no more hiding, no more pretending. Only the raw truth remained between us. We sat in silence for a long time. Neither of us moved. The air felt too heavy, thick with everything unsaid over the years. There were no raised voices, no accusations thrown across the table, just two people sitting with the full weight of their shared failures, finally uncovered and laid bare in the open. It was strange how the truth could both hurt and relieve at the same time. I looked at John, really looked at him. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the sadness, but also a kind of quiet acceptance. We had both stepped outside the lines we once promised never to cross. We had both failed each other, and somehow, knowing this, knowing it wasn't just me, softened the sharp edges of guilt, even if only slightly. I expected to feel rage, or to see it in him, but instead there was a numbness, a strange calm that wrapped itself around us like a moment suspended in time. "We've both made mistakes," I said quietly, unsure whether I was asking for forgiveness or simply stating the obvious. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, we have." Another silence followed, but this time it wasn't quite as heavy. We were still in the middle of the storm, but the wind had paused. And in that stillness, we did something we hadn't done in a long time. We talked. Really talked. We talked about how it had started, not the affairs, but the distance between us. How easy it had been to slip into separate routines, to stop noticing each other, to go from partners to housemates who shared responsibilities but not dreams. We spoke about the loneliness, the pressure, and the fatigue, about how we both reached for something outside the marriage because we didn't know how to reach for each other anymore. That wasn't an easy conversation. There were tears, there was pain. There were moments when one of us would go silent, lost in thought, unsure whether to keep going or to walk away. But we stayed at that table. We didn't run. We didn't slam doors. We didn't give up. By the end of the night, one thing was clear. We didn't want to end our marriage. Not yet. maybe not ever. There was still love, buried beneath the damage, still a connection that neither betrayal could fully erase. And maybe, just maybe, if we faced the truth together, we could rebuild something from the ruins. It wouldn't be easy. We both knew that. But for the first time in a long time, we were honest. And honesty, no matter how painful, was a start. The next morning, everything looked the same. The same house, the same kitchen, the same quiet hum of life beginning another day. But everything had changed. John and I were no longer hiding. We had stepped into the light of truth, raw and exposed, and now it was time to decide what to do with that truth. We both knew something had to change. The past couldn't be undone, but the future was still unwritten. If we wanted to move forward together, we had to take steps to rebuild trust, to create something honest from the pieces that remained. And the first step was letting Alex go. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. In some ways, it felt like saying goodbye to the version of myself that had briefly come alive again. Someone who felt seen, who felt desired, who had rediscovered emotions long buried under the weight of domestic routine. But keeping him in our lives would be like leaving the door open to a chapter that needed to close. John didn't ask me to fire Alex. He never demanded it. But we both understood it was the right thing to do. That evening, after Alex finished his usual work around the house, I asked to speak with him privately. We stood near the back door, where the garden met the porch. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the grass. Michael was inside playing quietly, and John stayed out of sight, giving me space. I looked at Alex, and for a moment, I didn't know how to begin. I think we need to end this, I said, my voice soft but steady. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. I'm grateful for everything you've done, for helping around the house, for being kind to Michael, for being there, I added, unable to stop the slight quiver in my voice. But I can't keep you here anymore. Not now. Not after everything. He nodded slowly. There was sadness in his eyes, but also understanding. He didn't try to argue. He didn't ask for more. He just accepted it. Thank you, he said quietly, for being honest. Then he left. No drama, no final words, just the quiet closing of a chapter we both knew could not continue. The house felt different afterward. Emptier, quieter. Michael asked where Alex had gone the next day. I told him that Alex had found a new job and had to move on. It wasn't a lie, exactly. But it wasn't the full truth either. That was the hardest part, holding back the truth from our son. Not because I wanted to lie to him, but because I wanted to protect him. Some truths are too heavy for children. John and I agreed to start marriage counseling. We needed help, not just to understand what went wrong, but to find a way forward, to learn how to be honest, how to forgive, how to trust again. Letting go of Alex was the beginning. Now, we had to begin the real work. We began counseling the following week. Neither of us really knew what to expect. Sitting across from a stranger, bearing our wounds, speaking aloud the things we had both avoided for years. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I had ever done. But it was also the most necessary. Our counselor was a woman named Ellen. Gentle, firm, and calm in a way that made you feel safe enough to fall apart. She didn't take sides. She didn't offer instant solutions. She asked questions that cut deeper than we were prepared for. And then she waited in silence until we answered. What were you looking for when you kissed Alex? She asked me one day. her voice even and direct. I sat there, stunned. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. I wanted to feel seen, I finally said. I wanted to feel like someone noticed me, not just as a wife or a mother, but as a person. I couldn't look at John when I said it. I didn't want to see the hurt in his eyes. But when I finally glanced at him, he didn't look angry. He just looked sad. And that was almost worse. Ellen asked John similar questions. He admitted that he had felt disconnected for a long time, that he had buried himself in work because it felt easier than facing the silence at home. He said he hadn't planned to meet anyone else. It just happened. And once it did, he didn't know how to stop it. We weren't excusing what we had done, but we were finally starting to understand why it happened. Rebuilding trust, we learned, wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to live with it, to speak about it without flinching, and to choose each other again, even after the hurt. At home, things didn't magically improve overnight. There were still moments of doubt, still silences that felt loaded. Sometimes John would glance at my phone a second longer than necessary. Sometimes I'd wonder if he was still thinking about her, Lisa. But we made a rule: no more secrets. If something was wrong, we had to talk about it. If something hurt, we had to say it. It wasn't easy. Some days, the conversations turned into arguments. Some nights, we went to bed without resolving anything. But the difference now was that we kept trying. John started coming home earlier. He made time for dinner. We played games with Michael, watched movies as a family, and slowly, carefully rebuilt the routines we had lost. And me? I started to forgive myself, not all at once, but piece by piece. Each time John looked at me and chose to stay, each time we talked without blame, I felt the shame loosen its grip. We were not the same couple we had once been, but maybe we were becoming something stronger. As the weeks passed, John and I continued counseling, and slowly we became more open. Not just about the future we wanted, but about the past we had been avoiding. There was one conversation I had been putting off. I needed to know more about her, the woman John had been seeing. Not because I wanted to punish myself with details, but because the not knowing had started to feel worse than the truth. So one evening, after Michael had gone to bed and the house had settled into silence, I finally asked. "Who was she?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. John looked uncomfortable. He rubbed his hands together slowly, staring at the floor for a moment before answering. "Her name is Lisa," he said quietly. "She works at my office." It felt like someone had pulled a thread inside my chest. I hadn't expected to know her, but hearing her name made it all real in a way it hadn't been before. Lisa wasn't just an idea or a secret. She was a person, someone John saw every day, someone he had smiled at, spoken to, maybe even held. I tried to breathe through the sharp sting in my heart. Do you still see her?" John shook his head quickly. "No. It ended before you told me about Alex. I stopped it. I knew it was wrong, and I didn't want it anymore." That made me feel slightly better, but not completely. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy and full of questions I wasn't ready to ask. He reached out and took my hand. It was rare, that gesture, simple but powerful. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I made a terrible mistake. I let something happen because I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I never stopped loving you, but I stopped showing it. I looked into his eyes and saw the same pain I had carried. We had both failed. We had both hurt each other, but beneath it all, there was still something left, something worth holding on to. I love you too, I said, and I believe you. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't undo the choices we had made. But it was a moment of grace, a soft place to land in the middle of our rebuilding. From that day forward, we agreed to speak the truth, always, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how vulnerable it made us feel. Because we had learned the cost of silence, and we weren't going to pay it again. Nearly a year had passed since everything came crashing down. We weren't perfect, not even close, but we were still together, and that meant something. That meant everything. Over time, the sharp pain of betrayal had dulled into something softer, something we could hold without flinching. We no longer walked on eggshells. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. Instead, we carried it with us, carefully, like a fragile but necessary part of our story. Then, one weekend, John suggested we take a short trip together, just the two of us. Michael could stay with my sister, and we could have some time to ourselves, away from the distractions of work, parenting, and routine. I was hesitant at first. Traveling alone with him, without the safety net of our daily schedule, felt strangely intimate, like stepping into a space we hadn't entered in years. But something in me wanted to go. Not to escape the past, but to see what was left of us when everything else was stripped away. We chose a small beach town, quiet, unassuming, with narrow streets, cozy cafes, and a long shoreline that stretched endlessly under a pale blue sky. From the moment we arrived, something felt different. We walked slowly, hand in hand, the way we used to when we were younger. We talked about small things at first, where to eat, the weather, funny memories from when Michael was a toddler. But gradually the walls lowered, and we talked about real things too, about what we had lost and what we were trying to rebuild. That first night, we sat on the sand and watched the waves roll in under the stars. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. There were no heavy silences, no buried tension, just quiet, just presence. On our last night, as we finished dinner at a seaside restaurant, John pulled out a small box from his pocket. I looked at him, surprised. He opened it slowly. Inside was a new wedding ring, simple, elegant, gold. I want us to start over, he said. Not to erase what happened, but to choose each other again, with everything we've learned, everything we've been through. Tears welled in my eyes. Not because I had been waiting for this, but because I hadn't expected it. I had accepted the cracks in our relationship as permanent, but here was a gesture that said we could still build something strong around those cracks. Not despite them, but because of them. I took the ring with trembling fingers and slid it onto my hand. It felt different from the first one, heavier somehow, but also more real. I love you, I whispered. I love you too, he said. And with that, we closed the chapter of heartbreak and opened one of hope. Life didn't magically transform after that trip. When we returned home, the laundry was still there, the fridge still needed restocking, and Michael still wanted pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Sunday mornings. But something had shifted between John and me, something subtle but real. We were no longer walking side by side in silence. We were walking together. The new ring on my finger wasn't a replacement. It was a symbol of the pain we had faced, the truth we had spoken, and the choice we had made to rebuild, not the marriage we used to have, but one that could withstand reality. We kept going to counseling, less often now, but still regularly. Not because things were falling apart, but because we had learned that marriage wasn't something you set and forget. It was something you maintained, like a garden that needed watering, even when it looked fine on the surface. At home, we were gentler with each other, more aware. If something bothered one of us, we spoke up. We no longer hid behind "I'm fine" or hoped things would resolve themselves. And slowly, the trust began to return. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough to grow from. Michael seemed happier, too. He didn't talk about Alex anymore. To him, life had simply moved forward. What he noticed most was that his parents laughed more, played more, and didn't argue in hushed voices behind closed doors. We started doing small things again, cooking together, sitting on the porch with coffee, watching silly movies on Friday nights. There were still difficult days, moments when shadows from the past crept in, uninvited. But we didn't run from them. We acknowledged them, then let them pass. Sometimes I thought about Alex, not with longing, but with reflection. He had come into my life during a time of emotional drought, and his presence had awakened something in me. I wasn't proud of what I had done, but I understood now why it had happened. It was never just about attraction, it was about loneliness, about being unseen, about forgetting who I was outside of roles and routine. And John, I knew he had his shadows too. Sometimes I caught him lost in thought, and I wondered if he was thinking about Lisa. But he never pulled away. He stayed present, and so did I. 1 year after everything unraveled, our home looked much the same. But it felt different. It felt earned. We made new promises. Not to be perfect, not to never make mistakes again, but to always tell the truth, to show up even when it was hard. To love each other not in spite of our scars, but with them. Looking back now, I realize how close we came to losing it all. But we didn't. And that is what matters. Our marriage isn't a fairy tale. It's not flawless, but it's real. It's ours. And every day we choose to keep building it, brick by honest brick.